Hello, and welcome to World Civilizations 1. We are on Chapter 5. We are doing Ancient China today. So let me go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint. I do really want to encourage you to watch the video of the Oracle Bones. It's only like 4 or 5 minutes. It's really incredible, explaining the whole process of what an oracle bone is and what it was used for in ancient China. It's just really fascinating. They were writing 3,000 years ago, and the reason we know is because they wrote on bones, and it was to tell the future. So it's really pretty interesting stuff. Okay, let's go ahead and pull up the PowerPoint, and I'll put myself in the corner. Let's get on with Chapter 5. Okay, ancient China. Here is a picture of an oracle bone. I am just fascinated with them. I think they're super interesting. I'd never heard of them before I started teaching this class, which is horrible. On a flat surface of bone, such as this, the Shang Dynasty, they would write messages to Shangdi sages that they were the earliest surviving example of Chinese ideographs. The messages are questions addressed to the gods and the sages, and you read what you do is you read the answers by giving it to a priest, a Chinese priest or diviner, who puts them in the fire, and how it cracks according to the fire is whether or not what the answer is. And many of the answers many of the questions were about, when should they plant a bumper harvest to have a huge, harvest and everything. Really awesome. Really cool stuff. Most of them were on shoulder blades for bulls and oxen, and some were etched on tortoise shells. Very interesting. Here we have the different dynasties. I would really encourage you to watch John Green's Crash Course World History, the one on 2,000 years of Chinese history. It's very, just helps you understand with your understanding. That's not something that's required. It's just under your, to help your understanding. Early China, most isolated of all ancient civilizations. And this is so cool because the reason it was isolated is it didn't need anything. They were very self-sufficient in early China. It had lots of tributaries, lots of people paying tribute, like Korea, Vietnam, all these different places were paying tribute, Japan, to China. They really didn't need to ever trade with anybody because the only thing they ever wanted was silver. Okay, so it was an agrarian-based society. There was a long series of dynastic monarchs bordered by desert and steppe lands, endured frequent invasions by nomads, Turco, and Mongolians. And the Mongols, very exciting chapter later on. Chinese religion involved worship of ancestors, nature, and spirits. Chinese geographic regions, you have the dry river valley plain. Remember, the Yellow River was the one they often called the River of Sorrows because it was very violent. And when it flooded, people died. The Yangtze River was the river that was peaceful. It was predictable, and it was not considered a violent river. So these two rivers were very, very different in early Chinese history. So you have villages appearing 7,000 to 6,000 BCE. Millet, barley, soy, hemp in loose soil called los. Tamar River, more water, villages appeared. 10,000 to 7,000 BCE, wet rice cultivated, people not originally Chinese. Okay. Eventually, northerners, the Han, conquered the south, and the rice became more important than the millet. Flood control required coordinated labor for big construction projects, contributing to unification of China. Religious practice of ritual appeasement of the ancestors. Ancestors were so important in that hierarchy of respect was almost it was almost a little too much, because no one could really question that. And we'll probably talk about that later. All right. The first dynasty is the Zhai dynasty. Little is known of it, and a lot of people think it was kind of made up because it's very mythological and like just big and robust, and they're not really sure that any of it's like factual. And then you have the Shang dynasty that they can really pinpoint to actual, events and people and that sort of thing. Associated with two important innovations, broadcasting and writing, it was very hierarchical. Powerful king with a warrior court, skilled artisans, peasants were the majority. Public cult of the royal ancestors, oracle bones used to discern divine wishes. I think they said there's over 200,000 oracle bones with writing on it, which is amazing. Writing and reading and learning and education has been extremely important to China as far back as it goes, that we can, history that we can see. Something I do want to point out is that slavery was not something you see in China. All right, you just really don't see it. You see very poor people, peasants, that sort of thing, but not slavery. Aspects of Chinese life visible during the Shang. Supreme importance of family, ruler and his household responsible for prosperity, emphasis on this world, importance of education and literacy. The Zhou dynasty, nomadic origins. Zhou extended China's borders. Phases of the Zhou dynasty, unified empire, so they took China and made it one. Strong rulers, dynamic growth. Provincial revolts, central power declined. Extensive literature survived, history records of all kinds. The Zhou took power, claiming the mandate of heaven. Of course, the mandate of heaven is really interesting because China had the mandate of heaven, where if a ruler was doing things he shouldn't, and I believe it was one of these rulers, maybe the Shang, not really sure if it's true or not, because if you're writing the records, you want the last dynasty to look bad. But they did say that one dynasty was having orgies and eating its opponents. Okay, that is not how you're supposed to behave if you're a ruler. So they would say that the gods took the mandate of heaven away and that actually peasants can revolt. They're allowed to revolt, which is really different than what happened in Europe. Kings and queens in Europe had something called, and maybe you've heard of it before, divine right, where they said, I'm the king, I'm the queen, I can do whatever I want. God put me here. You can't revolt. It is a sin. So you have a whole different perspectives of whether or not you're allowed to revolt against a king or not. Early bronze ceremonial ware, just absolutely beautiful. It's from the Shang era. It was for ceremonial usage. It is in your book. Okay, really beautiful. Wow. The Zhou dynasty, the smaller map shows the Shang dynasty. Okay, it was very small. Then it was unified. Okay. Right. Growing. Mandate of heaven. It was a Zhao concept of heaven, or Tian, universal principle of ethical cause and effect. Heaven gave a mandate to the ruler as long as he ruled well and justly. If he betrayed the mandate could be lost, thus justifying regime change. So if you're a bad ruler, you might have earthquakes, you might have a tidal wave, supernatural things, fires, and the people might revolt because you're not taking care of them. It could be a supernatural event, a natural disaster, or the people could revolt. Writing. Early Chinese pictograph dates back to 1250 BCE. Words into signs used to signify non-pictorial concepts. Students had to memorize about 5,000 to be literate. It has the richest vocabulary of any ancient language written. Earliest writings were found on oracle bones. Immensely important in unifying groups which called themselves Chinese. Chinese is a very sophisticated language even now. Thousands of characters. So it was highly involved even back then. Bronze work. The metal industry was very much something that was very early in China. about 800 years before it happened in Europe. I know a lot of it was having to do with smelting iron, where you're forcing oxygen into iron to make it stronger. And they did that, I believe, 800 years before Europeans did. Okay, tile pagodas type roof lines, diminishing upper stories, silk, jade, metals, and salt traded for houses, nomads, war chariot inspired invention of horse harness. Peasants, moderately prosperous, rarely enslaved. That's what I was trying to point out earlier. I wasn't sure if it was in this. I know it was in your book. Earliest surviving books date back to 800 BCE, but you know, paper doesn't last as long as bones. So that's why the oracle bones are so cool. Professional historians wrote chronicles of rulers. Remember, though, they might not always be true, because if you're employed by a ruler and he doesn't want you to put anything bad about him, then you don't, or your head usually gets cut off. Okay, poetry, book of songs, and then calligraphy. Right, battle chariot. Horses were domesticated in Central Asia, and chariots probably were invented there as well. Both came into use in China during the Shang period. It revolutionized warfare. Chinese archaeologists recently excavated burials that included both chariots and horses. And you know, the Mongols, which we'll study later, they were masters at riding ponies. They could shoot an arrow with accuracy while on a pony. It was amazing. Okay, metals and salts. The Shang, Zhao, and Qin monopolized access to bronze weapons and ritual objects. Iron was used for tools, utensils, sacred objects, and weapons. Iron plowshares, resulting in 400. You know, they really raised a lot more surplus, which also raised the population growth. The government had a salt monopoly to create tax revenues for the armies. All right. I had a professor in grad school that wrote about the salt monopoly in China, and there were even salt pirates at one time. Read his book. Silk production was women's work, only women's work, okay? This was very gendered. Ancestral offering and public ritual, prized for its beauty, easy to dye. The world wanted silk to trade. Medium for writing and painting as well. Used as currency, it was also money, paper, to buy war horses, source of tax revenue. The silk. Throughout history, certain crafts have tended to be gender-related. Silk weaving, one of China's most important industries, was women's work, as shown in the Ming period vase. Two women with a zither. Before the invention of paper, very early Chinese painting and printing was done on silk. Oh, that's beautiful. Confucius, Kong Fuzi. If you put Kong Fuzi really fast, it sounds Confucius, okay. Most influential philosopher. He really wanted to mold three kings or three huge rulers, three big guys, and they didn't want to listen. But what happened was his thoughts were put into a book called the Analects, and those Analects really influenced the families of China, and he influenced a lot more people than three big rulers. All right. Ultimate authority on Chinese ethical conduct, born to an impoverished aristocratic family, lived during chaotic warring states period, failed to attain a higher government position, he became a teacher. So the problem with Confucianism is that it's really, you got to look good on the outward. And that's really a problem, because it's all about a hierarchy. You have the 5 relationships, and there's no questioning, there's no back and forth. It's only that hierarchy, ruler to ruled. You know, if the rule just do what they're supposed to do, there won't be any problems. Well, if the ruler, listens and there's a back and forth, then you have a good community and pattern. Then you have husband to wife, and the wife's not allowed to question. It's not a partnership. It's very patriarchal. You have father to son. Again, it's supposed to be where son or fathers treat the sons with love and kindness and take care of them, and then the son gives respect. That's not really what it came out to be. It became very legalistic. If you're a good son, you'll do all this. And then the father really wasn't questioned. Questioning rulers is important, okay? We got our foundation here in the United States because we questioned a ruler. He said, you can't You can't go past this line in the United States. Is one reason we had that Revolutionary War. Can't go past. We're closing this land. Nobody's going to be allowed to settle it, and we're going to tax you heavily for the French and Indian War to pay for it without representation. And there were questions asked. And when there's questions, there's, good leaders can be questioned respectfully and answer respectfully. When there's only a one way is when we have issues in patterns in history of tyranny. Okay. I was trying to think of the other. Friend to friend was another of the 5 relationships. Friend to friend. I'm missing some. Oh, elder to younger. Okay. Confucian philosophy was founded on the Analects. I just talked about the 5 relationships. They're listed here. Social philosophy centered on individual and political relationships and basically high respect. No backtalk from the lower realm. Father, son, husband, wife, elder, younger brother, ruler, subject, friend to friend, which should be here, but there's always going to be a little bit of clout, and it's a hierarchy. And that's one of our history words. Democratization is where everyone's equal. All right. In Buddhism, there's equality. In correct Buddhism. In Confucianism and in Hinduism, you have this hierarchy that keeps people down and takes power and voice and agency away from others. Okay. 5 great relationships. Chinese family is the model. State should look like a harmonious family headed by males. Each person has rights and duties. Women subservient to fathers, husbands, and sons. If you'll look at that relationship list, women are mentioned, but they're at the bottom of the barrel. Benevolence and righteousness are chief virtues. Rich and strong had an obligation to poor and weak, but proper role for gentlemen was in the government service. But the thing is, if you can't question authority, then you can't challenge them when they're stepping over the line. And that kind of was the whole thing. Rulers judge according to their guidelines. Educated officials, mandarins or shi, would eventually become the governing class and remain for 2,000 years. Confucius had a low opinion of traders. Merchants and were at the bottom of the social ladder. I would say many of the ancient civilizations felt that merchants were swindlers, salesmen were worthless, just worthless people. I mean, they're just a really, really bad, low realm. I always think of maybe you've seen those movies where you have the traveling salesman back like in the 1800s, and they would sell like different elixirs to cure ailments, and they were all fake. So kind of that door-to-door salesman in the 1800s, on a horseback. Okay. Rulers came to prefer status quo, harmony and stability over change, distrust of innovation and foreigners. Xenophobia is one of our history analysis words, and they really didn't trust outsiders and foreigners. And I'll be really honest with you, if you follow Chinese history, they shouldn't. Because later on, you'll see 4 European countries and the US go into China and carve it up into 5 sections and take it over. They forced them to trade with them. China did not want to trade with them, and that was their right. And they used opium to dumb down the people and to make them unable. They smuggled, the US actually is part of this, and some European sources too, smuggled opium in to corrupt and mess up and make unstable the Chinese government. So we'll probably hit that as well. If not, then you'll have to do World History Part 2. So no wonder they distrusted foreigners. They did kick out the European countries and the US, told them to get out. So, all right, Confucius, Kong Fu Zi, undated illustration, much like other depictions of Confucius made after his death, was based on a relief from the stela in the Pelin de Sigantao. Daoism is related to Confucianism. Lao Tzu, a legendary founder, concentrated on nature, following the way. Excuse me. Dao De Jing, the way of Dao, attributed to him. Best government is least government. way of nature is perceived through meditation observation. Man must seek harmony with nature, avoid extremes, become popular religion, quest for immortality. Dichotomy, Confucian at the office, Daoist at home. It's kind of the yin and the yang. So structured legalist, looking good on the outside, and then a Daoist, more laid back and not so rigid and perfectionist. Confucianism is very much perfectionism. No thanks. 100 schools period, many new philosophical schools emerge. Legalism. Think of Confucianism, think of legalism. Political philosophy justifying the use of force, popularized during era of the warring states, sees people as inclined to evil, selfishness, so government must restrain them. Strict censorship, crush independent thought, which is always a problem in history. Allowing people to think for themselves is always a good thing. It's called freedom. Rivals to Confucius, Maoism, philosophy of Maozi, doctrine of universal love is solution to chaos during the warring states period. Rejected Confucian, emphasis on primacy of family, called for treating others as you wish to be treated, hello, golden rule, or the platinum rule, which is treating others how they wish to be treated. Lost appeal with rise of authoritarian in the Qin Shi Huangdi. Okay, and if you watch Crash Course World History, what is really cool is they talk about where the name China came from, which is really cool. And it came from the Qin dynasty, Qin, China, Qin. Okay, so pretty interesting. All right, so that is chapter 5. Thanks very much. Hope that helped.